We head now down to Nashville, my hometown, where the Attorney General of the state of Tennessee, my home state, has won a huge Supreme Court victory this morning by a 6-3 margin. The Supreme Court affirmed the state of Tennessee's right to restrict so-called gender surgery treatments, however you want to classify it, for minors living in the state of Tennessee. And the man who helped to argue that case and construct the defense of the law passed by the Tennessee State Legislature is the Attorney General of Tennessee, Jonathan Skrmetti. He joins us now. First of all, congrats. And what's it like? How do you become aware that you have won a big case like this? Where were you? Does your phone blow up? I mean, that's got to be a pretty amazing feeling. What was that like?
Well, it's crazy. It's crazy. I did not expect it to come out today. I thought we'd have another week or so to wait. And then all of a sudden, my Solicitor General, Matt Rice, who argued the case in the Supreme Court, said, "It's out." And then we immediately scrambled to read it and see what happened. And I still haven't been through all of the opinions. Working my way through them. But, yeah, my phone absolutely blew up. We've been doing a bunch of media stuff. Senator Blackburn and I did a press conference on AI a few minutes ago, too. So there was a little break from the Supreme Court stuff, but it's been a busy day. I mean, people care a lot about this issue. We have fought so hard on it. We've taken so much fire for it. It is really vindicating to come out with the win.
All right, I think you're one of the best attorney generals, smartest. I'm not just saying this because you happen to be in my state. I think if you look at the data, you have been on the right side of a lot of these issues. Having said that, would you have ever believed that you would need to argue that you can't do these surgeries on minor children when in the context of body alteration, it's been common sense for generations that, for instance, a 15-year-old couldn't get a full back tattoo virtually anywhere, that no parent would be allowed to do that. It's kind of staggering that we got here, isn't it?
It is incredible how fast everything has moved, but that comes on the back of decades and decades of academic work by people who are, really focused on the ideology. And what we saw when we put this case together, what we saw because Alabama had been litigating it and their Attorney General, Steve Marshall, had been fighting really hard, is that all the science underlying giving these treatments to kids was fraudulent, that it had been doctored in ways that were particularly designed to affect the outcomes in court. And so it's just built on a house of sand. And you see even these countries in Europe, the UK and Sweden and Norway and all these countries, which are by no means conservative, but as they look at the evidence coming in, they've said, we can't do this to our kids. There's huge risk. There's little, if any, benefit. It's wild that we have seen such big changes. I think what we're seeing now is a course correction, and people realizing that as real as these feelings are for kids, as hard as it is to deal with gender dysphoria, the evidence just does not support these treatments for them.
Okay, so 6-3 Supreme Court says the state of Tennessee can do this. This means that other states out there are also able to put in place similar laws as the one Tennessee has. But it also means that I would imagine other states are not required to follow this law. They can pass their own laws. What are your thoughts as the Attorney General of Tennessee on the idea of a Tennessee kid, let's say, going to Illinois or New York or California? Do you think this should be something looked at on a federal level? How do you look at those kind of decisions, someone leaving the state to have a surgery that wouldn't be allowed in Tennessee?
So the Constitution gives each state a lot of authority about what goes on in state. I've certainly got very strong personal opinions about this, but legally, what we can do in Tennessee is stop stuff from coming in from other states. So if a doctor is trying to send hormones into the state for kids, that's against Tennessee law. We can do something about that. There are certain laws that can deal with, folks who aren't the parents trying to take kids out of state. But there are still some really complicated legal issues out there. And I think, I suspect that at the end of the day, this is going to be resolved by the medical evidence as opposed to by litigation. I think you're seeing a lot of momentum on the side of however serious a problem this is, permanent, irreversible treatments for kids is not the answer. Most kids outgrow feelings of gender confusion, and so subjecting them to these procedures that will sterilize them, that can eliminate any sort of sexual function, that cause all sorts of potential development issues, both physically and cognitively. The science just isn't there. And my hope is that as people pull back from the culture war, pull back from the ideology, and just look at what the medical research tells us, you're going to see a lot of these hard left states move in the direction Tennessee's gone, not because they're culture warriors, but because they're rational.
That's well said. Also, it would suggest, and again, I know you're the Attorney General, but that I would imagine, we both have law degrees here, to what you just said, as kids are aging, and there are not an insubstantial number of these kids that are growing into adults and deciding, boy, I wish I had never done this surgery. I want to detransition. I would think a lot of these kids who were minors when they had surgery would have really compelling lawsuit opportunities as plaintiffs against the doctors and hospitals that operated on them as minors. Wouldn't there be, in your mind, some claims out there that are likely to be moving through the court system, which, in addition to all of the investigatory data that is saying, hey, this is not actually making kids healthier or better off, there's also potentially liability from a civil perspective that many of these doctors and hospitals might be facing?
I think that's absolutely a consideration. And, particularly when you look at the people who are pushing the fraudulent research, that is difficult to defend. And, of course, there are jurisdictional issues. People have to have a cause of action to bring. But I certainly would be pretty nervous if I were somebody who had been doing this. It's still relatively early for large numbers of people to be getting these treatments. And as time goes on, it's inevitable that the number of detransitioners goes up, maybe goes up very quickly to a very big number. There is a lot of potential exposure there, and I'm sure that there are lawyers on both sides of the V looking at what that might portend.
Talking to the Attorney General of Tennessee, Jonathan Skrmetti, big 6-3 win on behalf of the state as it pertains to these treatments. I think that's important. I started off the show talking about having a great deal of empathy and sympathy for a lot of these kids who are being led astray, but also parents. I'm sure you've heard more than anybody. You got ready for this case. The number of times that you heard, oh, you can either have a live, daughter or a dead son, or some variation of that a medical professional would tell a parent, which is a form of emotional blackmail that I'm not sure most parents are prepared to deal with, because the idea of something like suicide is so awful for so many parents out there to think about. This is really kind of staggering that it became a commonplace argument. Did you feel that way also, just even stepping a bit out of the law and looking at the larger culture surrounding this discussion?
So I think the single biggest thing that happened at the argument in this case was when Chase Strangio, the ACLU lawyer on it, conceded that this does not have an effect on suicide rates, because that is what's been used to push a lot of parents. And listen, this is really hard for kids. This is really hard for their parents. They are dealing with a very confusing and complicated issue, and there's been such an ideological influence on how this is discussed that what's best for your kid gets tied up with somebody else's political agenda. And I have a lot of sympathy for families that are dealing with this. We all need to be thoughtful and supportive. And I mean, this is a hard thing. So I'm hoping that by shining the light on the debate about medical evidence and by bringing the actual evidence to the forefront, and that's what the court did. I mean, this is squarely about the legislature's ability to evaluate evidence and reach a decision in the medical context. I'm hoping that by talking about the evidence, we're able to bring some more clarity and some comfort to families, and not just have this be a snap decision based on, who they voted for president, or who they're talking to and what they care about politics. This is a really serious medical issue, And I don't think we've been doing right by our kids.
Did you expect this result? It's always hard for anybody out there that is trying to analyze questions and the overall oral argument aspect of this. Were you confident this would be the result? What did you expect, and how does it comport with the result now that you have it?
So argument went really well. I thought our briefing was great. I have a phenomenal team here. They did a really, really, really good job. They worked hard on this. But you never want to be confident. I mean, the justices have months and months to go over this. They could have come up with some issues that we hadn't even thought about. They're looking at the effect of their decision on the law as a whole. There were a bunch of different ways the court could have gone to give us a win here. And I think the Chief Justice very carefully chose a narrow path that really focuses on the fact that we're talking about kids and medical treatment. This is not a case about transgender status. This is not a case about sex discrimination. Necessarily you have to take into account whether somebody's a boy or a girl when you're looking at how medications affect them, because there is a physical difference sometimes. And I thought this opinion did a really good job of walking through why this is not a big ideological issue, but simply a traditional look at how legislatures regulate the practice of medicine, which is something they've been doing for hundreds of years.
Last question for you, and maybe there's an answer different than this. It seemed, as I have had a chance to look at this, that treating trans people as not a protected class is a significant component of this ruling. Was there anything else that you've picked up on that you think is significant, not only for this case, but going forward so far, that may not be getting talked about enough or discussed?
So, there was talk about whether the court should look at whether transgender status is a protected class. And the Chief Justice said, we don't have to get there because this isn't about a law that's directed at transgender people. It's about a law that's directed at medical treatments for kids. So there was a concurrence by Justice Barrett that Justice Thomas joined that said, well, we don't think it's a protected class, and here's why. There was an opinion by Justice Alito that said, I'm not sure the court's really able to duck this question. So this is looming out there. There will probably be more litigation on that front. Given how aggressive Tennessee's legislature has been on these issues and how aggressive we've been litigating them, we may well be in the middle of that going forward. But there are still open questions here that the court's going to have to answer at some point.
Well, congratulations. Thank you on behalf of Tennesseans for sure, but also many people across the nation listening to us right now who feel like you have won a big battle for sanity and for parents and for kids that are dealing with difficult issues out there. So thank you, congratulations, and we appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Look, that's Tennessee Attorney General Jonathan Skrmetti reacting to the big decision that came down a little bit earlier today. White House debuted nearly 200 feet tall flagpoles, one on the north lawn, one on the south lawn this morning, gift from President Trump. That's because the American flag's a powerful symbol. And Pure Talk's also gifting a flag to 1,000 military veterans this month. When you switch your cell phone service to Pure Talk, you're helping them honor military veterans with brand new flags from Allegiance Flag. You're also saving as much as $60 or $70 a month on your cell phone plan, with plans from just $25 a month for unlimited talk, text, plenty of data. You can enjoy America's most dependable 5G network while cutting your cell phone bill in half. Here's how you do it. Dial pound 250, say the keywords Clay and Buck. Pure Talk's U.S. customer service team will get you switched hassle-free in as little as 10 minutes. That is pound 250, say Clay and Buck, to support veterans and to save a bundle in the process with America's wireless company, Pure Talk. That's pound 250, say Clay and Buck.